Good evening and welcome to the Legion Cantina. In today's episode, we're going to be talking through the recent balance changes that have been made to Star Wars Legion and talking about how they might impact the game going forward. So, in a recent stream, Atomic Mass Games announced the changes that were going to be made. There have been a few points changes and a couple of changes to the ways certain rules work in the game. So, first thing I'll do, just because it kind of impacts how the balance of some units are affected later on, I'll talk about the changes to Steady, Relentless, and Charge. Effectively, the change that's been made to these is that previously you could do them outside of your activation. So you could guidance a unit with Yoda to get them to do a steady attack, or pull the strings or whatever. And that would, if you did a move action, it would trigger Steady, Relentless, and Charge. Effectively, the change that has been made is that for all of these rules, it's been changed to say during its activation. So you can still, if you were to guidance, you can still get a unit to move, but you can no longer get it to trigger Steady, Relentless, and Charge. Also means off a standby, which I think is something that's gone a little bit under the radar, is that you could no longer trigger Steady, Relentless, and Charge off a standby because it's not during your activation. So, for instance, if you were to take a standby with Han, you can no longer, if you're behind line of sight, move back and then get the steady shot off as you retreated. You would have to choose between moving and shooting. So that is will have an impact on the ways, for instance, you can use standbys with Force users, or if you were ever taking a standby with Bad Batch and things like that, you're no longer getting that steady off that move action. So it will definitely be relevant. I do wonder if this change has just been made to kind of streamline the game a bit, because I could understand for a new player, for instance, when you assume a unit is kind of done with its activation, if it's suddenly coming back again on a different unit's activation and it's suddenly attacking you again, that might be a bit confusing. But yeah, I can understand why some people aren't super happy about this, but maybe just a sort of quality of life thing for newer players. The rest of the changes were all to do with points. So I'll go through the sort of more general one first, and then kind of go through faction by faction. I'll do timestamps at the bottom if you want to skip ahead. First change has been to Recon Intel. It was 5 points. It's now 8 points. Um, at 5 points, it was probably one of the best gear options in the game. At 8 points, it's still going to be really good. But I think what this does do is it makes it harder to take on mass, because suddenly if you're chucking Recon Intel on 2-3 units, rather than costing 15, it's costing nearly 25, and that does have an impact. So again, this is one of those changes that if you're just throwing it on 1 or 2 units in your army, it's possibly not super impactful. But if you're throwing it on your entire army, which was perhaps something that certain lists were doing, then it would be a bit more problematic. So I can understand why this change has been made. Still usable, just not quite as good as it used to be. Does also make forest dwellers on Wicket look increasingly insane, given that that is 3 points and gives you a dodge token. But hopefully they don't bring the nerf hammer down on that one as well, because I'm not sure Wicket is that OP. Moving into more faction specific stuff, going to talk about CIS first. There have been some changes to the protocols, so defense, attack, and engagement. Essentially, these protocols, because of the way AI works, kind of lost their sort of inverted commas downside, which was the AI dodge, the AI aim, or the AI attack move. Essentially, because AI is very rarely triggering now. It can still happen, but it is a lot less common. And it basically meant that because you can now exemplar dodges and aims from the tactical droids, Kalani, whatever, Kraken, you can get more value from these essentially. And it was meaning that you had a snail tank with outmaneuver, re-rolling those dodges with nimble, getting those dodges back with nimble, and then AI aim giving you that precise 2, giving you those extra dice again when you either generate an aim naturally or you were just exemplaring one from a tactical droid. So again, I think these changes are fine. Snail tank will still be really good, but again, this just maybe slows it down a bit, them going from 3 up to 8 points. Engagement protocols goes down. I think this one just isn't being taken that often because it doesn't have the upside the other two do. So moving it from being more expensive to cheaper than the others, I think is fine. I think if you're trying to cut points, maybe this is one where you might now chuck it in. There is a reason to take this now, whereas previously there wasn't. Changes to the PK and Viper. Essentially, I think these are just hits to B2s. The worker droid is basically doubled in cost, which is actually one of the biggest nerfs to happen during this wave. Essentially, I think this change is fine. Like, again, if you're bringing back a B2 with this, you're still fairly happy, but it's no longer as omnipresent and as powerful as it used to be, especially as you could bring two B2s back on 1 health, which could keep your firepower up while only needing to spend 12 points. So again, I think this change is fine. The Viper Recon droid can be taken in B2s, and I think obviously in B1s as well, but I think this one, like, it's gone up a bit because it was just very good value before, and I think it's still fine. 2 white, generally you're not surging, it's not super scary. The Observe isn't bad, but yeah, I think this change is fine. Changes to medics. So I'm kind of grouping these together. Essentially, just the medics for the Empire and for Rebels both went up a bit. Medics for Empire went up by 3 from 19 to 22, and medics for Rebels went up from 18 to 20. These are fine. I think medics were getting more value in Empire anyway, just because they have red saves, they have more valuable units. Also, you know, he had the invincible Vader thing that few people were running to actually quite good success, which is fair play to those people because that list looks really difficult to play. So fair play. Rebels less so, although again you can check this on Bad Batch or Luke, which isn't bad at all. So yeah, I think these changes are fine. And I don't think either of these makes them unusable, but again, just maybe makes them a bit more of a choice now, whereas they might have been like an auto take before. Where we all expected the nerf hammer to come swinging down, and where it definitely did, was for Gar. And we'll go through the heroes first, and then talk about sort of the units themselves later. So changes to Yoda and Anakin. Anakin used to be 155, now is 170. Yoda used to be 180 and has gone down to 170. Anakin was probably the best unit, or very close to the best unit in the game at 155. You know, he was 20 points cheaper than Luke. He was 10 points more than Ahsoka. Like, he was just insane. And with Tempted in there as well, like, you're effectively getting 2 attacks 90% of the time with him. But 90% is exaggeration, but a lot of the time you were getting an extra attack with him. He had Master of the Force, he has Charge, he had everything you would want. And his command cards are great. His 1-pip's super scary now. His 2-pip's still really useful. Yeah, like, I think this is a really good change. I think you could even have pushed him to 175 and people would still use him. I think at 170 it's now more of a, like, he's less of an auto take, because I think it was kind of the case that if you were taking Gar and you didn't take Anakin, it was seen as like almost like sandbagging a bit and like almost intentionally making your list worse. So he's very good, still usable, and yeah, I think this is a sensible change. Yoda's got worse despite the fact his points went down. Reason he's got worse is because his guidance is now significantly worse than it was before. You, for instance, even if you're running these two together, which I think is not actually that bad, but if you were going to run Yoda and Anakin together, if you were to guidance Anakin now, you could get the charge off if you were to give him a move action, and the same with Bad Batch, which I think was a more prevalent combination. Yeah, I understand the Yoda decrease. I think at 170 he's pretty usable. And again, him versus Anakin is now quite an interesting choice. They do different things, and you know, there's different combos with Yoda's command cards, which are still really good. But I think most people will still opt to take Anakin, especially as you can run him in 5.0 first, which I think again will still be really strong. So yeah, I think these changes are fine, and I get why you would make Yoda cheaper when you were effectively nerfing his guidance. I am surprised they haven't hit Palp with a bit of a decrease. I think you could knock Palp down 10, 15 points as well now. I think it would still be fine. But yeah, I understand the Yoda decrease. Commandos, this was another unit that sort of, these were a bit newer to the game, but I think people have been talking about these as kind of a bit of a problem value-wise for a while. I was expecting to go up by 10, they went up by 15, so Clone Commandos have gone from 75 to 90, and Delta have gone from 100 to 105. They made a point during the stream of, like, hitting Delta is kind of less relevant because you can only ever take 1, whereas Commandos you can take 3, so maybe that's why they've been a bit harsher with the generic Commandos versus the Delta. I think it's now trickier to justify them. I think they still have a use, but I don't think they're an auto take anymore. There's definitely skill to using these and like when you're dropping them into the board and things like that. And I think there will now be a decision in GAR as to whether you cut some of your like kit and heavy weapons or whether you drop an activation. And obviously up to the individual players as to which you think is more relevant. I think we're probably going to see a bit more Delta squad over the Commandos now, just because I think the value for 15 points, you are getting a bit more sort of punch with the Delta squad versus the Clone Commandos, and that infinite courage is always really nice. So yeah, I think might see a little bit more Delta, but again, I think these will just be a little bit less prevalent, and GAR overall will be a bit weaker. Again, another change we all saw coming: ARCs got more expensive. And there was also other changes that means the sort of meta list for arcs gets more expensive as well. But the basic unit goes from 58 to 64, and the strike team, which were also a bit problematic, went from 24 to 26. The strike team is good because it has tactical and because you can double move and you can share stuff around. And again, I'll talk about another thing that's been changed later on as to why that's sort of quite problematic in some ways. Scout 2 and like yeah, I think arcs are still really good. I think they again like it probably just robs you of an activation now or some kit, and I think that's fine. Like I think arcs are still perfectly powerful in their own right, and like if you know you compare them to something like Sleeper Cell in Rebels, arcs are maybe a bit tougher and like they have that charge baked in, but actually I think Sleeper Cell and arcs are now a lot more comparable than they were. I think Sleeper Cell are actually pretty good now, and them and arcs are on the same power level. So this change again makes sense, and I think if like you read through Fifth Troopers article in advance, the changes are actually pretty similar to the ones they suggested, and like I think that kind of echoes a pretty balanced change overall. The final changes were to the commanders and the medics. So I think this medic was just in line with the rest of the changes, like medics, PKs, all that stuff got hit. So medics went up by 3, which I think is absolutely fine. The commander went up by 8, and I think this is actually more of a hit to arcs than the actual arc increase themselves, because the way to run arcs was just full arc squad and a commander in there, because when you are able to share that surge token with clone sharing around as much as you want, it's really powerful. And again, the point they made in the stream is that effectively gave your whole army red surges unless you really, really put down a lot of firepower on a GAR list, and then you might be able to get through the surges. But yeah, your whole army being red surging, and also, you know, you can even get that surge to hit offensively if you really want it with the arcs as well. So I think that makes a lot of sense. It is now very expensive at 30 points. I think like this is a tricky decision to make, because you know an arc squad with a commander has gone from costing 80 to 94, 95 effectively, I think. And again, that's kind of in line with the commando changes. It's almost like a 15-point increase, so that is a bit of a kick to the sort of the meta arc lineup. Guard did get a buff, which I was a little bit surprised at, but it was a bit of a random one. I think there were definitely units that could have benefited from this more than whatever this is. So yeah, all the BARC heavy weapons went down by 3 points for whatever reason. Maybe just they want to see more BARCs knocking around, but this change feels pretty random. Obviously makes BARCs better, but not that much better. I, yeah, I can't really explain this one. More power to them. As a Rebel player, exclusively, this was the change you love to see. Again, I'm not sure Op Luke is the real outlier in terms of being bad in a Rebel list, but sure, maybe this is just prep for the changes that are going to be made to Rebel heroes elsewhere. But he goes from 175 to 165, which again is a real kick to Ahsoka, because Ahsoka is now only 20 points less than Luke, doesn't get Master of the Force, has 1 less health, 1 less courage. And has fewer force slots. Gets 1 more training slot, I get, which is nice, and jump 2. But yeah, this feels bizarre. And Luke getting disengaged as well now, with not necessarily having to take force push. Anyway, not the change I would have made, but a nice change nonetheless, and means you can now get Luke with full kit as long as you don't take force push for like 190, which is pretty good. and he does still have decent command cards, although You Serve Your Master Well has obviously got a lot worse, well, a bit worse with changes to Steady, Charge, Relentless. But yeah, this is a bit of a random change. I think this and the BARCS are the only ones where I'm like, I'm not really sure why that happened. Like, obviously neither of them were like meta units, but I think there were more sort of obvious changes that could have been made to help out different factions. Very surprised Shadow Collective didn't get anything. I don't understand what they're really doing with Shadow Collective, unless there's a big change coming quite soon. Because they didn't really get anything in the changes into 2.6, and it feels like they've really been left behind. In terms of how this is probably going to end up playing out, I think now that Gar's been sort of knocked back a bit, I expect the Separatists and Experimental Droids is still going to be really good. Like, it was solid before, and now Gar's been knocked down. It just gets a bit better. Empire, there's the Tack Strike Iden thing, which you can try and make work. The Vader Pout thing got a bit worse. Well, no, got a lot worse with the way that Relentless has been changed. So that's not so much a thing anymore. So maybe Tack Strike Iden's the way to go. Rebel wise, I mean, it's still a complete mess. I think definitely Bad Batch are still the way to go because they're a very, very good unit. It's what you pair them with. Op Luke now, that combination works pretty well. But yeah, we'll see. I think Rebel's still struggling with a bit of faction identity, and then Shadow Collective just seems to have been wiped off the face of the earth. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below. I've tried, I think I've got all the changes in here. If I have missed any, do let me know. But yeah, hopefully that will make sense. And yeah, excited to see how these changes shake things up. I think Gar has been pretty oppressive for a while, so it'd be interesting to see what comes next and is the thing that everybody hates. But yeah, like and subscribe. See you for the next one.